we've been talking about managing performance, and we have a brand new process for doing that. And first I thought what I'd start with is giving you the context of what has somewhat historically been done at Sun Country Airlines. And if I might need help on a couple of these pieces. But what I understand to historically have happened at Sun Country has been, when we've been in survival mode, some extreme things have happened regarding managing performance, things like compensation, where people were asked to take 50% pay cuts and during dire circumstances. But performance management in general, as I understand it, was done using a very old school model. Here's the bad news, is a lot of this same model was used at lots of companies and it doesn't work. The old school model I'm describing is this, that there's a once a year annual performance review. And after that performance review is done, everybody receives a cost of living increase. So it's kind of like a once a year performance review is done, and then the knee-jerk outcome response is a cost of living increase for everyone. A lot of businesses have used this model historically and in the past, and here's why it's a terrible model. The reason it's a terrible model is because usually, let's say it's at the fiscal year that performance reviews are done, everybody is dreading getting to that part of the year. Managers hate doing performance reviews, and employees hate being the victims of them as well. So nobody is looking forward to the annual performance reviews, and if you are a manager or supervisor of a large team, worst case scenario is you don't even get through all of them because you don't have the time. It's just not realistic to get through the annual performance review when you have a really, really large team. Or if you do and you're committed to it, you spend an insane amount, inordinate amount of time of your work year getting them done. Next is following that, the kind of knee-jerk cost of living increase response. Now, as an airline or in any business, the business may or may not be able to bear that or support that. But let's, pretend in an organization or a business that can support it, then everyone gets that standard cost of living increase. Terrible idea. Here's why it's a terrible idea. For very much the same reasons we were talking about before when employee negative issues come up. If you're somebody who is a really valuable employee who works really hard, how fair is it that you just got the same exact raise as somebody who does not work very hard at all? That's not very fair. It also demonstrates zero differentiation between team members. The reality is you should receive a raise, and a raise that is in response to the level of value that you bring to the company, to the organization. The level of work that you actually produce. The level of follow-through and how much you demonstrate the competencies and values the company says you need to demonstrate in order for us to reach our strategic initiatives and departmental goals. To the extent you do that, your raise should be reflected in that. To the extent you do not, your raise should be reflected in that. So the old school model that is really the annual performance review with a knee-jerk response afterward is an extremely poor business model, but it's also an extremely poor people model because you have no idea how you're doing. You just went through an exercise everybody hated and then received no good indication of how you're doing in return. And let's face it, we don't come to work just for the fun of it. We also come to work for a paycheck, for our health benefits, and for all the other components that we work for. So this is an important indicator of who you are, how you do it, and what you do for the business. So here's our brand new performance management process. You may or may not have noticed that every quarter a new article comes out on SYI called HR Talent Tips. The first one was about our culture competency compass model. The second one was about how to become a better interviewer with some very basic interview tips. The third one was about job descriptions. I'll talk more about job descriptions later. And this was the fourth quarter one, which is about our performance management process. The articles have embedded in them everything you need. But if you are a flowchart person, you like something that is just right in front of you and simple, here's the flowchart that was created for our performance management system. It's a simple 3-step process. It starts with check-ins, and check-ins can be very informal, just hallway conversations, and I'm sure all of you do check-ins today. If you're wondering what a check-in is supposed to look like or be like, you can go back to the article that Lisa just had navigated from and hit check-ins, and we do have a check-in form available to you. It's not required or mandatory that you fill out a check-in form. It can just be a guide that you use. But here's what a check-in is supposed to be. It's a 4-part process, and you've probably had many of these conversations before with team members that go something like this. So how are things going? They have an opportunity to tell you how things are going. You then get to tell them your perspective on how you believe things are going. You compare that with where you're supposed to be and where you said you were going to accomplish or be, or what your current projects are. And then you end that conversation with tweaking, well, let's get back together tomorrow because we have some gaps here, or we thought we were going to be accomplishing this, and this part's done, but that part is not. So a check-in conversation is, how are things going, giving feedback in both directions, comparing it with where you're supposed to be, and then ending the conversation with some to-dos, actions. Let's tie these things up. Let's make sure we are on track. Very simple check-in conversation. And if you are a solid or superstar performer at Sun Country Airlines, this is the only thing you'll ever experience regarding performance management. And here's why. You have regular check-ins and the person is performing as they should. Great. Continue those conversations and continue managing their performance by having those regular check-ins. You just keep looping back and forth and back and forth. That's the only thing that happens. And ideally, during their or your entire career. But let's say the person is not performing as they should. You have a check-in and you realize there's a gap here. And you have another check-in and you realize, ooh, the gap is even bigger. It's time to send an email. Send an email to get the person back on track. This email means that you are documenting, but you're not having to fill out a separate form, because everyone hates that. That's part of what everyone hates about performance reviews, filling out forms. So you send an email to say, you know, in our recent check-in, we talked about we're at this point, but we really need to be here. Can you please get these 1, 2, 3 things accomplished by the end of next week? So here's what's important in this get back on track email communication. The purpose is you're requesting performance improvement. Performance improvement at this stage and time is a request. And it's your responsibility to say, here are the actions and goals we've agreed on previously. Here's where the gap is. Here's how those expectations have not been met. Here's how I'm expecting you to get things back on track, and by when. So this get things back on track feedback email is a request for performance improvement. Let's say they get this email, it's laid out for them very clearly. It also provides documentation for you. They understand, get it, get things back on track, things are fine. Whoop, we loop all the way back up to regular check-ins. Great, because that's what we want. The goal here is performance improvement. But let's say you send this request for feedback email and performance does not improve. Here's the third and final step in performance management here at Sun Country Airlines. There is a form we call the EPIF. That stands for Employee Performance Improvement Form. And that form used to be known as the counseling form. I don't know if that sounds familiar to any of you. The counseling form no longer exists. So my background's in psychology, and when I saw the counseling form, I was like, what? We're not a church. We're not a clinic. We're not a law office. We don't counsel people. We coach them for their best performance. So the EPIF form looks like this. Looks like this. So sorry. It has some similarities to the counseling form. So for those of you who said, yep, I remember or know the counseling form, you'll see that the format has some similarities. The big difference is that it really integrates our culture competency compass model. So here at Sun Country Airlines, we not only focus on what you do in your job, but how you do it. Here are the main directionals. We value follow through, integrity, and collaboration. You'll see here, if there is a performance issue and you're placing someone on an EPIF, there are some zero tolerance behaviors. Those are starred. If someone engages in a zero tolerance behavior, they can be immediately terminated from the company for obvious reasons. However, the other things you see on there that are not starred are opportunities for improvement. And they link with our values, our competencies, and our models, because you'll see some new things up here. Things like disrespecting others, disrupting the process of work, or disrupting collaboration. It can even be willful damage to the company brand. So we find that that is going on. That is something you can be placed on an EPIF for. Now, this is no longer a request. If you place someone on an EPIF, performance improvement is mandatory. It must happen. It must occur. Now, here's the good news about this form is, I think that these forms can be used like a weapon sometimes, and people are branded with a label on their head or a scarlet A from the supervisor or manager if they're placed on an EPIF form, and that's just wrong. Because the goal is improvement. That is the goal. We want everyone to be doing well. So part of this form says, what was the EPIF outcome? Did they succeed? When you place this on the person's file for documentation, because now this is formal, did they get it? Did they turn things around? Great. They succeeded. Explain how they succeeded, and then this is done. You go all the way up to check-ins. It's over. And I think that's important to communicate. Granted, sometimes it's not over, and their performance does not improve. And what's really important is for you to then create an exit plan. It might be yucky, it might be hard, but it must be done. We've had a couple of conversations in this class about people saying, it's so hard for them that they'll say, this is final. And then the next time they'll say, this is final, final. And then the next time they'll say, this is final, final, final. And my response is, have you looked up the definition of final? There's no such thing as final squared or final cubed. It doesn't exist in the definition of final, because final means end, final. So this is important when it gets to this stage, because performance improvement is mandatory, and you must come up with a plan if performance improvement doesn't happen in the timeline within the request. But this also means, remember, the whole entire process, you've had check-ins, you've sent email for feedback. This also means it's an established trend. It's an established pattern. You don't just do this in a fit of, oh my goodness, I want someone to get back on track, and you jump to an EPIF. That's not how the process works. So this flow chart, is something to utilize, and it really also, protects you as a supervisor and manager as well. Any questions about the process at all?